The night Neymar lost the ball wasn't the night he lost the game. It was the night he lost protection. In the 2020 Champions League final, something irreversible happened. The fouls stopped coming, the passes stopped finding him, and for the first time in his career, Neymar realized the system had moved on. Before the 67th minute, Neymar was untouchable in PSG's system. Every attack, every transition funneled through him. In matches leading up to the final, he drew fouls with surgical precision against Atalanta in the group stage, against Leipzig in the round of 16, earning space and time that allowed PSG to orchestrate their rhythm. The team's structure bent around him. Mbappe sprinted into channels, Neymar opened, Di Maria supported him with angled runs, and even midfielders deferred, knowing the magic originated from Neymar's touch. The protection was invisible, but absolute. Coaches spoke openly about letting Neymar decide. Thomas Tuchel often praised his capacity to accelerate or slow the game as he saw fit. Until now, it was not just skill, it was authority codified into the system itself. Even before the whistle blew in the final, signs of fragility appeared. Neymar's touches in the first half were met with more physicality than usual. The fouls he drew were ignored. Subtle pushes and clips went unpunished. Analysts later noted the contrast. In the same tournament, he had averaged 3.2 fouls, one per game before Bayern. Against Bayern, he barely earned one before halftime. The difference was not skill, not positioning, it was enforcement. His teammates noticed. Marco Verratti gestured repeatedly, urging referees to intervene. Mbappe, sensing a different dynamic, began taking risks higher up the pitch, pulling defenders away from Neymar, almost without thinking. By the 67th minute, the shift became undeniable. Neymar received the ball near the edge of the area, and the familiar shield he had relied upon, the instantaneous whistle, the subtle awareness from referees that he was the center, vanished. Kimmich clipped him. Alaba tugged his arm, and he fell into space without protection. The stadium saw it, commentators remarked on it, and Neymar felt it. The gravity he carried was being quietly redirected. Where before he orchestrated attacks, now he was forced into improvisation. His eyes met Tuchel on the sideline, a search for guidance, but even the coach's instructions could not restore the hierarchy. The 67th minute marked more than a moment. It set the tone for Bayern's relentless focus on Neymar. From the restart, Alaba pressed higher, stepping into his space with calculated aggression, while Kimmich shadowed every touch. Bayern's midfielders didn't merely mark him, they anticipated him, cutting off passing lanes, forcing him into tight areas. Each clip, each tug went unpunished, a stark contrast to the leniency he had enjoyed throughout the tournament. Commentators noted the difference in tone. "He's being picked on," one said, and the crowd murmured in recognition. Neymar, normally untouchable in build-up play, now felt the weight of scrutiny, the absence of intervention. Every attempt to escape pressure was met with intensity. When Neymar tried to drift left, Goretzka mirrored his run, intercepting angles he had once owned. When he cut inside, Pavard's shadow remained, ready to close space in a heartbeat. Even subtle touches drew immediate attention, forcing him to improvise under duress. The camera lingered on his body language, slight hesitation, a shift in weight, a flicker of frustration, signals that a star is no longer in full control of his environment. Bayern's approach was surgical. It wasn't about fouls, it was about dominance. Mbappe, by contrast, thrived in the disruption. As Neymar was harried, Mbappe sprinted into spaces Neymar once commanded. Tuchel's instructions, subtle gestures, and nods increasingly sought to exploit the teenager's speed and directness. When Neymar delivered a pass into the final third, it was Mbappe who became the decisive threat, receiving the ball in stride, facing the keeper. The hierarchy had shifted so quietly that many in the stadium didn't notice at first. Only the subtle change in who the team instinctively sought in moments of opportunity. By the 75th minute, the game had already written its hierarchy. Neymar's touches were fewer, riskier, heavier, each one measured against Bayern's persistent pressure. The system had adapted around him, implicitly redirecting authority. What remained wasn't failure, it was a revelation. A star's orbit can change without announcement, without malice, simply through the mechanics of control. Neymar's protection had evaporated mid-match, and the spotlight quietly, irreversibly shifted to Mbappé, leaving him to navigate the game he once commanded alone. As Bayern's press intensified, Neymar's role transformed from orchestrator to facilitator. He no longer dictated the rhythm. Instead, he became a conduit, a necessary link in a chain whose final pulse belonged to Mbappé. On the left flank, Mbappé sprinted into space with the kind of freedom Neymar had once commanded, receiving passes that bypassed the central congestion that used to define the game around him. Each connection felt preordained, almost mechanical. Neymar's vision and skill were still present, but the weight of finishing, of decision-making, had quietly migrated. In one striking sequence, Neymar tried to thread a pass into the box. His intended target, Mbappé, had already anticipated the trajectory, bursting past a Bayern defender before Neymar had even completed the touch. Commentators highlighted the contrast. "Look at the acceleration of Mbappé," one said. "Neymar creates, but Mbappé decides." Even the sideline reactions reflected the change. Tuchel's eyes constantly flicked toward the teenager, urging him forward, adjusting his runs, subtly reshaping PSG's attacking shape. Neymar, for all his flair, was now in service of another's moment. The psychological shift was as stark as the tactical one. Neymar's body language, once relaxed and commanding, now carried a quiet tension. His touches were measured, careful, aware that a misstep would disrupt the new hierarchy. Mbappé, by contrast, moved with a liberated energy, a teenager suddenly entrusted with decisive responsibility. The system that had revolved around Neymar now revolved through him, with Mbappé as the focal axis. It was a silent handover, executed in real time, unspoken but visible to anyone watching closely. By the closing stages of the first half after the 67th minute, the evidence was undeniable. Neymar still dazzled, still evaded challenges, but the final product, the finishes, the decisive moments, were increasingly Mbappé's domain. The match footage alone illustrates the subtle yet irreversible realignment. The ball travels, the system adapts, and a star realizes the gravity of his influence has been quietly transferred. Protection, once automatic, now exists for another, and Neymar's centrality, so long assumed, has been silently redirected. The final whistle blew, but the story had already been decided long before. Neymar slumped toward the sideline, exhaustion and frustration etched across his face. The cameras captured fleeting glances. Mbappé sprinting toward Tuchel for instruction, celebrated subtly in isolation, while Neymar lingered, almost unnoticed. Analysts immediately noted the contrast. Where Neymar once dominated post-match discussions, Mbappé's influence was now front and center. In interviews, Tuchel praised the teenager's decisiveness. Kylian showed incredible awareness and composure under pressure, he said, carefully framing the narrative around the new focal point. Neymar's own post-match comments were measured, reflective, a quiet acknowledgement that the hierarchy had shifted. Statistics reinforced what the eye had already seen. Fouls won by Neymar in subsequent matches dropped sharply. His touches in the final third decreased, while Mbappé's presence in decisive zones increased. The metrics of influence, once dominated by Neymar, now trended toward the teenager. Analysts highlighted the shift in expected goals, contribution, and ball progression. Where Neymar had historically created opportunities, Mbappé increasingly became the finisher, the decider. The numbers were not arguments, they were evidence, irreversible and cold. Even within the locker room, the change was visible. Teammates instinctively deferred to Mbappé in critical sequences. On tactical review videos, players positioned themselves to exploit his speed and decision-making rather than Neymar's creativity. The system adapted without fanfare. The gravity of leadership is not conferred by titles or fanfare, but by the natural flow of decision-making and trust. Neymar's role had subtly narrowed, while Mbappé's authority expanded, a rebalancing that would define PSG's next campaigns. By the end of the night, the lesson was clear. Stars don't fall in isolation. They fall when the system ceases to orbit them. Neymar, for all his skill and history, had reached the limit of the protection that once elevated him. Mbappé now carried the gravity, and the world could watch the shift in real time, irreversible, silent, and complete. The 67th minute may have been the hinge, but the final whistle confirmed the transfer of power, a quiet exit from the center, never to return. In the months that followed, Neymar's role at PSG subtly transformed. Matches no longer revolved around his movements, his touches were fewer, his influence narrower, and the tolerance for mistakes far lower. Media narratives shifted with the same quiet inevitability. Mbappe was now the club's axis, Neymar its brilliance and support. Injuries that once paused the game for him now drew scrutiny instead of protection. The system had adapted permanently, proving that even the brightest stars are constrained by structures larger than themselves. The new hierarchy was reflected in every tactical layer. Mbappe became the final option in transitions, the player teammates instinctively sought in moments of pressure. Neymar's flair remained, his skill undiminished, yet the freedom he once commanded was now conditional. Tuchel's team sheets, PSG's build-up patterns, and the post-match commentary all reinforced this truth. Influence had migrated. Protection, once automatic, had been reassigned. The system did not erase Neymar's talent, it merely redirected the center of gravity. The lesson of that 2020 final is both subtle and cruel. Stars do not fall solely because of decline or injury. They fall when the environment shifts, when the invisible forces of hierarchy, priority, and trust realign around another. Neymar's brilliance continued to light the pitch, but the apex of authority had quietly moved. The game itself, the mechanics of control and consequence, ensured that his orbit would never return to its former centrality. And so the 67th minute became more than a fleeting moment. It marked the irreversible transfer of power, a redefinition of influence within one of Europe's elite teams. Neymar, once the untouchable center of PSG's universe, became a facilitator, a star whose brilliance was now measured in service to another. Mbappe's rise was silent but total. The system's gravity shifted, and the world witnessed a quiet exit from prominence that would never be undone. The night that Neymar stopped being protected did not end with a whistle. It ended with realization.